Thank you so much.
Cheers.
I have questions already. So I will introduce our third and final speaker of the day.
Hello.
Hi, Olivia. So Olivia Louvel is a French-born British composer and artist whose work draws on voice, computer music, and digital narrative. Her work is presented in the form of sound recordings, live performance, sound art installations, and video art. She often operates at the intersection of creation and documentation with works such as The Sculptor Speaks 2020, a resounding of a Barbara Hepworth archival tape, The Hole Inside 2019, a generative sound mural exploring the violent misogyny of the incels, Data Regina 2017, a multimedia suite based on Mary Queen of Scots writings, and Afraid of Women 2016, an audio-visual piece raising awareness of Rojava, the autonomous zone in northern Syria. Her practice is built upon a long-standing exploration of the voice, sung or spoken, and its manipulation through digital technology as a compositional method. Thank you very much.
Okay. We did a test on Monday, but the Microsoft Teams looks completely different today. So I'm going to share my screen, use computer audio, and do a quick test, and then we will include computer sound because I don't have the sharing tray today. Screen, right? If I play that, is it the computer sound?
Their thoughts in landscape are always expressed outwardly, and the eternal grace of feeling part of the world.
Can you hear that in the...
Absolutely, yes, that's fine. We can hear that.
As, not from my own speakers, but directly from your computer. Is that right?
It's coming through well on my computer.
Okay, so it should be all right. Okay, so let's... Right, can you see that full screen? Yes.
Yes.
So I'm presenting today The Sculptor Speaks. In 1961, Barbara Hepworth recorded a tape in a workshop in St. Ives, and the tape's purpose was for a recorded talk with slides for the British Council. And I found out about the existence of the tape as I was doing some research at the British Library. I started at that time composing from her writings for my project called Hepworth Resounds, but I was very eager to work with a voice. So it was quite exciting when I found out about the existence of the tape. So I booked a listening session at the British Library, and I heard the tape there for the first time in their audio booth. And I chose the word resounding because a voice had been muted and shelved temporarily at the British Library and was in waiting for a new carrier since it first sounded in 1961. Hepworth's voice was still, was no longer moving, nor sounding. And from the moment we are born, we try to use our voice to make sense of the world orally. Our voice emission is ephemeral. It's a breathing substance in movement, a living material whose vibration is transmitted through the air. And so the particles vibrate and collide one another in a wave pattern as sound waves. But when recorded, this reverberating voice becomes entrapped in space and time. It becomes a disembodied voice captured on a carrier, and the voice is objectified and no longer refers to itself, to its source, but becomes a distinct sound object, which can be played back at a later stage and eventually reconsidered and resounded. And so through the practice of resounding, Hepworth's voice becomes a moving entity. The French composer Christian Zanesi, who is the former director of the Groupe de Recherche Musicale in Paris, in relation to his work with archives with his project Archion, said to me that the archives were in movement. And he added that we often believe that a work from the past, an archive, is fixed forever. However, what is not fixed is the context. And so this archival voice of Hepworth behaves as a moving entity, evolving accordingly to context and time. Jacques Derrida stated that the cinema is the art of allowing the ghosts to come back. So is the practice of resounding the archival voice. In the age of technological reproducibility, since the recorder itself is an archiving machine, every recording is a priori an archival object which can potentially resound anew in space and time. So the first version of The Sculptor Speaks was a stereo version for broadcast and resonance extra, which is part of Resonance FM, the arts broadcast platform. And the version was transmitted on the 10th of January 2020, coinciding with Barbara Hepworth's date of birth. The second version is a 35-minute audiovisual piece, which I published online in the midst of COVID last summer. And I'm going to play several excerpts, but first I would like to briefly run through the visual's creative process. So on the left, these are footage I collected in St. Ives on the beach. And I drew from her relationship to landscape, and in particular, the Cornish landscape. And on the right, I made a small maquette with washi tape, creating some geometric forms. And this led me to make 20 slides by cutting small fragments of pink acetate, which I inserted into the slide frame. And there is a correspondence here with the fact that The Sculptor Speaks was originally a talk with slides. Then on the left, this is me filming in the studio. So what I did is I worked with the superimposition of layers, combining analog and digital projection. So the slides of geometric shapes were projected onto the seascape in motion, and the projected result was filmed again. The slides bring a kind of grainy texture with stains, and that counterbalance with the clean digital lines, which were done at the final stage. So this, the array, the geometric line, was conceived with After Effects, and for this I collaborated with Antoine Kendall, and the geometric line is being slowly drawn, completing a full cycle over the duration of the piece.
Form. And at the same time, fully formed as a stone form, or wood form, or marble form, in my mind. I am basically and primarily a carver, and the properties of stone and wood and marble have obsessed me all my life. This feeling for material and conviction about truth to material is not, in my case, a matter of just letting the material inspire me. On the contrary, the completed image occupies my mind first. Fully formed as a stone form, or wood form, or marble form, in my mind, before I start sculpture.
So the voice is a material, and I'm applying principles of sculpture to Hepworth's voice to manipulate its texture, as direct carving of the sound material, exposing the material itself and often resulting in the abstract. And direct carving was introduced by sculptor Constantin Brancusi at the beginning of the 20th century and adopted by Barbara Hepworth. And it's an approach where the actual process of carving suggests the final form. And it's perhaps because I mostly work in the concrete, manipulating sound fragments from a music concrete lineage that I've embarked on resounding this tape. And so the emphasis is on manipulating the sound material and revealing the work of art within the tape. In my resounding, the whole original material is being reworked. I could have fragmented a voice and make a kind of collage piece, but I chose to maintain the linearity of the original material.
Metal has an entirely different kind of structure, and as I have said, it took me nearly 30 years to find a way of using it. Where I felt free to work in metal, I needed to understand it in order to be stimulated by it. I came to enjoy its very exciting properties experimenting with sheet metal. I bent and twisted the sheets under tension until I found out the nature of its construction and forced it to express what I wanted by its nature and not against its nature. I worked entirely by instinct, cutting, shaping, and rubbing the metal into what I wanted until the final moment of bending and twisting the whole thing. Either it worked or all was lost. There was no possible retreat, or all was lost. There was no possible retreat, or all was lost.
So in this excerpt, all the sounds are generated from her voice, even the really high pitch. Additionally, for the piece, I've also used some kind of sound wave tones like foghorns or pitch down to create low bass. But this is the core is really manipulating the voice. I have some music concrete sound in the background. They're setting up scaffolding. So I've used several software. It doesn't really matter what I've used, but this one, maybe I just wanted to highlight it quickly. It's Audio Sculpt. It allows you to draw on the graphical representation of the voice of Barbara Hepworth using filters. One of the key questions was, how far do I allow the abstraction of the words? As you've noticed, her voice is incredibly melodic, and the Yorkshire accent has faded in favour of a BBC received pronunciation, which can perhaps appear a bit dated. And as I'm navigating between voice and sculpture, these two notions of voice and sculpture, the question was, how far do I allow the abstraction of the words? And I wanted to convey and transmit the message, which is a formidable insight on a creative process. So I constantly negotiated between the semantic voice and the emergence of an abstracted voice, a sculptural vocal entity. The other question was how to deal with the tape crackles. The material I worked from is very crackly, noisy, and certain frequencies of the voice are quite sharp at first, and they required some digital treatments, equalization. But something that came up recently, actually last week, and you'd think I would have thought about that before, but sometimes, you know, things come up. I mean, 2 years, 3 years in the process of working on something, is that the crackles are normally associated with vinyls and vinyl reproduction. And suddenly I wondered, why are there so many crackles on this tape? And the outcome is probably that the original master could have been transferred as a backup medium on a vinyl record. And it's likely that the vinyl copy would have been sent out by the British Council for the talk to happen in other locations. And so that would explain also why the duration is 32 minutes on the original tape. So then when I thought about it, I thought this is really interesting, and I was wondering where are the vinyls of The Sculptor Speaks? I'm sure they are sitting somewhere. Be interesting to research them. So approaching the analog material, I worked with the defaults of the material. I even emphasized the clicks of the tape at time to create rhythmic patterns. And also the tape, well, the material I work from is quite damaged at some point. So the voice is muffled when Hepworth is recalling the wartime. So I did not attempt to repair the tape, but I played with the sonic narrative as she recalls the beginning of the war in London. And I'm going to play an excerpt of that.
When war broke out in 1939, I had moved with my young family from London to St. Ives in Cornwall, where I still live. The grandeur of the horizon and the strong pagan landscape of Cornwall gave me a more strongly developed preoccupation with the formal rhythm which would convey my response to this environment. Cornwall as a landscape. As a landscape. As a landscape. The forms of these sculptures are the forms of my thoughts, and also my bodily sensations being related to the universe, at a time when all life and freedom was threatened by the course of world war.
The compositional process of resounding the sound archive is at the center of attention, moving between preserving the archival material and touching it to manipulate it with digital tools. So, without wanting to disrupt the coherence, I've had to navigate a thin line of authenticity to Barbara Hepworth and also to myself. I had to find my voice, my angle within this archival material. Also working from the spoken word as a unique source, the tape could appear too wordy at times. And so I created negative space at some point by slightly extending the tape's duration. And I felt really conflicted to edit a small part of the text out. But when you think about it, the tape had already been edited by Sir Alan Bowness, a late British art historian, and it was already a transcription of a given reality and a new sound object to which I'm now giving a new resonance. This is the original open reel tape. I wanted to find out about it, so I contacted the British Library. Because what I worked with was a digitized audio file. So the lead curator, Stephen Clearly, kindly provided these images and valuable information. And so what he said is that they have the original 7-inch master tape plus 2 copies. They are 7-inch and 5-inch diameter respectively. And the copies were not made by the British Library. They were made by the British Council before they received the collection. And the audio file was made from a CDR transfer of the analog master, which was made in October 2000. So I could easily access the audio content of this 1961 open reel tape because it had been digitized from its analog state. The emergence of digital preservation has greatly contributed to the transmission of our sound heritage, facilitating access for the public and researchers. But it's a durational process that requires a constant update of formats and as they become obsolete. but the British Library has worked a lot in that direction. Another question was, as I was looking at the tape's picture, I wondered which recording device she could have used in 1961. It's the analog era. So there was the Nagra 3, the portable magnetic tape recorder, made its entrance in 1957. So sound capture became mobile at that time, liberated from technical constraints of the studio. There was also the Hua, the main competitor of the Nagra, that developed a reporter's portable tape recorder, and they were used a lot in the broadcast by the BBC because they were much more affordable and smaller. The Hua was used a lot in the UK at that time, so perhaps this is the device she used, but she could have also used a Telefunken, a Grundig, a Philips, all worked with 7-inch tape. But the point is that the emergence of this domestic tape recorder and this portable technology allows Barbara Hepworth in 1961 to capture from her own workshop her voice and the surroundings. Did she operate the recording device herself? This is the kind of thing, I think, as a sound producer, I can speculate that she did record herself on her own because most of the domestic tape recorder of the time seemed fairly straightforward. You just had to press play. And even if it was set up by a technician at first, or if the tape was implemented by a technician, on the original 1961 tape, we can hear the ambient sounds throughout her voice. And from the sound quality of the tape, I assume that she did record at different times, not necessarily the same day, because the frequency of her voice is fluctuating with completely different background ambience. And so we know that Barbara Hepworth was keen on documenting her practice through writings with an extensive body of writing. So this was a new medium for her to document her practice. The sculptor documents the creative process in situ, surrounded by sculptures anticipating current sound practices with the ubiquitous home studio. Hepworth, the sculptor, records and speaks as the artist documenter when knowledge is materialized in sound. The practice of resounding deals simultaneously with the temporal and spatial transmission of audio signal and the transmission of cultural heritage and knowledge. With Barbara Hepworth's tape resounded, we access a distinct dimension to sense a legacy, the dimension of the oral. And to conclude, in resounding her voice, my purpose is to broaden our experience and understanding of Barbara Hepworth's legacy through an oral investigation, voice as sonic documentation. Thank you. What do I do now? Where I am? Where am I? I don't know where I am.
I think there should be a rectangular button with a cross that you can stop sharing from, Olivia. Thank you so much for that presentation.
Okay, have I stopped sharing now? Yeah. Oh yeah, here we go, stop sharing. I just can't find the window anymore behind everything. Okay, I've got it, stop sharing. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So it will be lovely to have all the speakers present. Thank you so much. And I think Rowan and Laura are going to lead again the Q&A. Perhaps Eleanor would like to join in, I'm not sure. And if everyone has questions that they could put, please, in the chat. And then we can assimilate those and people can either ask them themselves or request that we support that. And yeah, so we'll start with, I'm just having a look in the chat myself.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for that wonderful talk. It was absolutely amazing to see how you navigate sculpturality in your own work as a practice of embodying experience. And one thing that came to mind after hearing all of your talks, it's this connection, this in some respect, maybe even loose connection with the other through the act of embodiment as a process of knowledge shaping, as a process of acceptance, as a process of creating and then sharing out into the world through the pieces that you've created. And I've made very many notes. And I was wondering if we could start maybe with a few lines from each of you on this relationship between the deconstruction and reconstruction of space through sound and experience, and the experience of embodiment.
I'm not sure. I think you have to repeat that. Sorry, I'm completely like I'm not. Say that again, please.
So I was wondering if we can discuss a little bit about the idea of reconstructing and deconstructing spaces through the implementation of sound as a way to make meaning and to sort of create an experience with the space.
I don't mind going first.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I suppose I was really conscious in making that video that one of the things I was doing was, in effect, reconstructing the space of the house within the language of video and within the forms of the narrative forms, the kind of the time base of the video itself, and also as this house is very, it's not accessible, so it would be usual for the viewer to only encounter the house. I mean, most viewers have never seen the house; they only see the house through my video, if you like. And of course, one of the things I was interested in throughout was, the strangeness of finding myself there, and in a sense, and feeling really, quite frankly, other to it. It's a kind of a perfect house, and a very privileged and wealthy house, and I'd ended up there in part through a system of patronage. I was a Stanley Picker Fellow, so his wealth was also paying for me to make that visit, which of course I'd partially contributed to in my adolescent consumption of makeup. So I felt this very complex sense of both being having this extraordinary permission to enter the place, but also being absolutely estranged from it, and also, just something about the domestic ideal. Almost anyone was estranged from it, even people who felt more entitled to it, perhaps. It was the perfection of its memorial, the absent body of Stanley Picker, sort of left anyone else, like going in there, you felt like a stain, you felt like, you felt your presence as a noise and a disturbance. And so I felt very conscious of this in reconstructing the house. But so, of course, reconstructing it through video, however much I attempted to draw the viewer into a kind of the draw on the viewers and the listeners' memory of touch, of sensual encounter. Of course, none of those phenomena they were all rendered within, and those experiential qualities were rendered within the medium of video. So the sound was very important in terms of both reminding the viewer that the video, in a sense, the finger clicks and hand claps often mark cuts or shifts between shots. So to remind the viewer or the listener that we're in a composition, but also to kind of to extend a more maybe a kind of more profound sensuality or intimacy through the sound than was ever going to be possible with the images or with the narrative suggestions of the text.
Thank you. That was really wonderful to hear. Nwando, maybe you'd like to speak a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, I think like I said, one of the interesting things that I'm interested in is that, you know, you can't have sound without physical space, and when, depending on the way you listen to the sound, so listening to the sound through headphones is going to be a really different experience to listen to the sound through speakers in the space. And so I was very interested in how you could create the illusion of feeling multiple spaces at once, as a way of, I guess, breaking down our death grip on the present now reality, which is very important to us, so we don't fall apart. You know, the ego is important, but to have a numinous experience, you need to like just loosen that grip a little bit. So how can you be in the present moment now, the present space now, having an interaction with the family of man, or having an interaction with curved form or Chun Quoit, but at the same time seeing Chun Quoit and seeing the image of, you know, seeing, you know, first of all a maquette of it here, and then seeing Hepworth giving her speech at the UN there, and then seeing an image there, and then listening to my friend Ed on the violin on top of the original Chun Quoit, which is the Neolithic standing stone, whilst hearing me walking around him while he's playing the violin. And can that help you to just kind of like slightly, dissociation's not a very positive experience, but you know, what's the light side of dissociation? Just like slightly kind of like separate from the very important perception that we're in a shared objective reality. So I think that kind of invitation to loosen that grip is interesting to me, and I guess it's something that I feel quite naturally I can do that. Also, I've worked with a lot of practices where the aim is to do that in order to transform the self and the community and society. But I love the idea of just inviting people into moments of that, and the idea that you can do that quite simply through recordings, through certain technologies, and then just through the facts, you know, the realities of space and being in the presence of great art, that you can I can like draw all those threads together is really interesting to me. And that I have no need to also like keep a grip on what meaning people draw from that it's going to be a very unique experience, because the way that our senses work is always going to be just, you know, we think that we have this shared objective reality created by our senses, but you know, it's actually quite unique, each person's. And so that each interaction in each moment, so you're listening to one bit of the piece and you're in front of one sculpture, and there's an invitation to be in front of a specific sculpture at a specific moment, but that is not the way people do it, and that's fine. And then also maybe you're in front of a sculpture, but there's another person in front of you. You know, each person's individual experience is going to be completely unique, and then the position of all the different bodies in the space is just going to create, you know, make a different sonic experience for each person in each second of existence. So the multitude of different experiences that will be created by my choreographing of people, by people's natural choreographing of themselves in space, I think is also really interesting, that so people are constantly making their own meaning by virtue of a specific moment in time, and then also their own behaviors.
That's great, thank you. Just to touch up on, to come back to something that you mentioned, and it really resonated, this idea of loosening the grip of reality and changing meaning isn't fixed anyway, it's something that's supposed to change. But in this context, because you will all work with technologies in different aspects, how do you think that influences the layers of experience that you end up creating through your practice? Who would like to go first?
Well, I could just answer to the first question just briefly about the reconstruction of the...
Absolutely, apologies, yes.
Me was reconstructing the voice. So she was in the room, and with the spatialization of sound, how she could move in that room, which was her room in St. Ives. And so the question was how she would enter that space at the beginning of the piece. So I chopped a voice because I just wanted it to come from the distance, really a bit fragmented, like it's trying to come into the piece, into the space, into the room. And then it was to devise a strategy for her to move in that room, in that space. But when I presented it a couple of weeks ago at the Hepworth Wakefield, talking about the resonance that Nwando was mentioning, the space is so big, and the voice was really reverberating, and you could perceive it from another room.
Olivia, I think you've muted yourself.
Have I been muted all that time?
No, just the last maybe 5 seconds.
Invisible hand, I don't know. Did you hear the bit about, I was talking about the gallery, the resonance?
Yes, the reverberation.
So you go in another room and you hear in the distance, you'd hear a voice. So of course you were losing it. What you were losing there was you were losing the precision of my piece, but it didn't really matter because you were gaining something else, which was a kind of ghostly entity coming, and you just grasp whatever you wanted to grasp as a visitor in the other room, which was also another valuable experience.
And I think that sits very well within the segment of still and moving, in terms of what you were saying about some elements of your work being lost, but others being gained through this reverberation. So I thought that was quite beautiful. In terms of the next the questions that I posed earlier about the influence of technology in your work and how that affects the layers of experience that you produce, how would you negotiate that in your work or try to mediate it?
Who wants to answer that?
I don't mind chipping in here. Yeah, so it's quite, I always feel a bit strange thinking about myself as a moving image artist because I don't really think, although I'm really interested in the history of moving image, both cinema and artist moving image, I don't really think that's the way I arrived there. And I think maybe my use of video editing software is perhaps more related to histories of publishing and also the history of image and text in art, like conceptual art and pop art, stuff like that. And I use video, and the reason I kind of ended up, I think, making video was particularly to do with the experience of composing within video editing software, and that it allowed me to bring many different kinds of things together. And I made sculpture before I made video, and I think I think about video composition as a kind of bricolage, as this space into which I can bring many different kinds of artifacts. I mean, that film that I showed you some sections of is an early film, and is actually one of the few films in which I've actually produced, what you might call live action, like long video shots. Often there's photography, documents, so a whole range of different kinds of artifacts which I gather together and then begin to organize in the video editing software. And also, of course, the capacity to use sound and to use percussion. So I think, in a way, the technology, I mean, I arrived in the technology not because I aspired to make a film. I sort of accidentally made a film by, in a sense, using video technology to enable me to have, you know, to make these compositions that were homogeneous, you know, like many, I mean, heterogeneous, sorry, not homogeneous, many different kinds of things. Of course, one of the complexities, and indeed perhaps maybe to do with a certain kind of moment where this sense of a kind of migration of artifacts through the digital was starting to happen. One of the problems for me is, of course, they become rendered as a single digital object, which is something I try and resist, like through talks like this, through talking about the work. But also what's really important is they're actually installations. And it's like one of the things that's really hard to convey in the talk is, you know, that I use projection and amplification, and these are, you know, in which scale is really important. And I use them as elastic media that magnify things. And I just wanted to really, you know, agree with what Nwando is saying about, you know, the sensory experience of being amidst sound. And one of the things that I really love to do within a video installation is have the sound so that you feel it. You know, and there's often really deep bassy sounds that you can actually, that you're actually touched by the sound in your stomach, you know. So yeah, it's you know, technology has been really interesting to me in finding new methods, but it's, you know, in many ways it's also its remoteness and the complexities of it are, you know, continue to be problems that I try and overcome, I suppose.
Sorry, did I interrupt anyone? No. That was brilliant to hear, particularly about the three-dimensionality of sound and potentially being in a space where you could make that actually being felt by participants, by spectators. In some ways, would that kind of further change the idea of the sculpture and the space to something that's being also embodied by the person who's in the space witnessing the creative or the artifact? Nwando, would you like to add anything on the idea of technology and the layered experience?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and leading on from what you were both saying, I think that's something that interests me, that there's an invitation for people to experience in my piece themselves in a shared space with the artworks, and then, you know, the artworks as reflections of humanity. And so there's you know, almost like we're all engaged in a grand theatrical experience where we're all partners in the space. And I think that in terms of technology, I'd consider, like, obviously with this piece I was working with sound and the technology of the speakers, not the headphones, but I'm very interested in the idea of like low-tech technology, like particularly low-tech indigenous technologies, and within my work looking into ritual cultures of the Black Atlantic that are not like you know, there's a hierarchy in terms of what's considered technology in our cultures, and I think the rituals, the myths, the embodied practices are also really important technologies in that they include tools and forms which give you access to certain things, and it just so happens that it's quite often to the numinous, which is really important stuff. So the technology of the circular path, which is what you have in the Hepworth in Wakefield, that the galleries are all arranged in a circle, perfectly mirroring Hepworth's own interest in the circle as a spiritual symbol, and then the feeling of walking that being an important technology which is going to have an impact on your vestibular system. Your vestibular system is a system that it goes off key if you're drunk. That's your vestibular system in ear and everything. So, you know, you're going to have an experience of walking around a circle, and that's going to have meaning. So I'm always quite interested in in terms of layering experiences, like using lots of different types of technologies that are going to give you access to different modes of feeling, different ways of being, and potentials for opening out perception. And I think, I guess that's also just something that I felt really connected to from my perspective of the way I see Hepworth. I feel like that's something that she was really interested in as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this leads quite nicely back into Olivia's work about, the whole idea of resounding. Olivia, would you like to add?
Yeah, I mean, technology is it's like a mallet, a hammer. I mean, it's the same. It's a tool. We shouldn't make a big deal out of it. So I didn't want to mention the software I've used. Also, there wasn't much time, but they are tools. And but it's the first time I work with a vocal entity which is not my voice, because so far I've always manipulated and stretched and carved my own voice. So for me, that was quite challenging to do that with her voice. Yeah, sorry, just lost it.
There's just a couple of questions left in the chat, but I'm conscious we're over time. And so shall we just make these the last two questions of the day? So there's one from Alice who says she's actually on a train, so she can't join the chat, but she's asked, Elizabeth, if you manipulated the light for the video, and did you move any artifacts for aesthetic effect?
No to both. The house was shot entirely without lights, and in fact during the course of the film, although it was shot over 6 weeks, as we move through the house, the day ends, so it gets darker and darker and darker during the course of the film. And it was very early on, and I wasn't technically great, so it was a real struggle to actually do. But yeah, there were no lights at all. It was just me and my camera, and I wasn't able to move anything. And part of the reason it was just me and my camera, it was actually very difficult to get. It wasn't straightforward to get access to the house. It was very private, and so yeah, I had to be very, very light touch. So obviously I couldn't move anything. There were artifacts, but also it wasn't really the sort of situation where I could have asked to move anything. I didn't feel, but also I didn't really want to. I kind of wanted to just move through the house and in a way I was trying to create this sort of spectral occupation of the house, so it seemed quite important to not have a material impact upon it. The only bit, the shots of the outside of the house were done with a crane, so I had to get quite high up. So that was the only bit of complicated kit involved. I mean, not a real crane, like a camera crane.
Okay, thank you. And there's a question for Nwando, which is in relation to ASMR. And in summary, this is from Ruby. I watch it as a form of relaxation, and the elaborate video sets and narrates these creators make has always been fascinating for me, but I've never considered incorporating that sense of intimacy into artwork. What made you want to incorporate that element? And do you have any particular ASMR creators who inspired you?
Yeah, well, I think for me, ASMR, it's just an incredible tool. It's not very well understood yet. But what we do know about it is that it creates this sense of intimacy, and what a great kind of shortcut really into creating intimacy. I'm interested in public intimacy. I'm interested in intimacy not just being something that's that's private, or even worse, hidden in the shadows, as if it's something that's shameful, but something that can be public and useful. And again, something that's very useful for transformation of the self and the other. We know that psychological warfare is visited on us through, online and through the media. And our hearts and minds are tapped into to change our opinions and to have an impact on behaviour. And I think I'm interested in using it in a more positive way, not to get people to vote for terrible dictators, but more to have beautiful experiences with art. That, I really believe that you can, you have an experience with art and you can go away and it can continue to transform you. And so I think ASMR is a useful way of doing that. I mean, also in terms of this particular piece, because it is a very cross-modal experience, people quite often, it's the sounds. I work with a neuroscientist called Professor Sophie Scott, and in her department at the moment, UCL, they're doing some research into it, and I think their thinking is that it's sound that reminds us somehow of touch. So that's the cross-modal experience. So I think in terms of my relationship, creating a sound piece to respond to sculpture, it also really made sense. So can I create a string that draws the participant viewer experience, have in connection to the sculpture, this original moment of all the fingertips and the carving. Can we create an analogous experience of feeling, not replicating? I don't want people to feel like they are the sculptor, but I want to give them a physical, visceral, tactile experience through sound, and ASMR is really great for that.
How long is the installation in place for, Nwando?
It's until February.
The whole length of the exhibition?
Yeah.
Great, so everyone can hopefully go and experience it.
Yeah.
Right, I think I should wrap things up on that note, because we are so over time. I would like to thank so many people. So obviously I'd like to thank the audience for coming today. I know we're dropping slightly, but we've had a really great response today, so thank you everybody. I'd like to thank the artists, all of you. I've really enjoyed hearing everything you've said. It's given me a lot to reflect upon, and I'm sure everyone else too. I'd like to thank Laura and Rowan for being such good hosts with the Q&A. Thank you so much. And I'd like to thank Nicola for being in the background and helping with everything in the setting up. So Nicola in our research department, thank you very much indeed. And obviously Michael and Eleanor for their support in the Hepworth Research Network. And we will be doing more of these things, so we will keep you posted. If anyone's interested, do get in touch. And yes, I hope everyone has a really fantastic Friday evening and a good weekend. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.